Namaste, friends, and welcome to our Sunday edition of Words of Wisdom Gyan Ganga on our Virat Hindustan Sangam social media channel. We are today at episode number 219, and with Dr. Subramanian Swamy, we have a very interesting guest who has just written a book. I would just like to tell you about our program. Today's topic is History of Hindustan, World's Oldest Continuous Civilization. And I am proud that today's topic is part of our Virat Hindustan Sangam mission of projecting the correct history. So we are very happy to have this program and our guest, which is Mr. Narendran Tillaisthanam. Mr. Narendran Tillaisthanam hails from a technological background with more than 2 decades of industry experience spanning telecommunication, automation, and software. He holds a master's degree in software engineering from USA and a certificate of management from Harvard University and a master's degree in business administration from Warwick, United Kingdom's Warwick University. Currently, he is the Chief Technological Officer, CTO, of an Indian-based multinational company where he and his team work on artificial intelligence. However, our author's interest, Mr. Narendra's interest, go well beyond technology. His curiosity has led him to explore multiple disciplines, including economics, history, business, and science. He is passionate about Indian history and actively engages in lectures and in various forums. Mr. Narendra believes that facts, not personal views, should form the basis of India's history. Fueled by this thought, he has spent 5 years collecting various research material, including research papers, scientific journals, books, and articles. The culmination of his extensive research in his book, The Saraswati Epoch, is the important publication of his. And as we discuss this new book in our program with Dr. Subramanian Swamy, it is welcome to our author, Narendra ji. I have to also thank our team that week after week they put this program together. So with these words, it is over to Dr. Subramanian Swamy to start this discussion on this book, and also we'll have further discussion with the author and the panel. Thank you. Dhanyavad.
Thank you, Jagdish. I believe you are now in the cold winter of America, but still you found time to come for this program. Shows your dedication. Let me introduce our speaker today, or our main person today to educate us. And his name is Narendran Tillaisthanam. Now, Narendran means, of course, man, and Indran. So it's basically Indran as Lord. So Lord Indra is his name is in it, and he has produced. He doesn't need to, because he's in the cyber world and so on, and he's doing extremely well there. But still, he has been motivated for India to come out with what we really are. And so today's discussion is about the history of Hindustan, and it's about its long history. It's very difficult to start from where we started, but it's a very long history, longer than anybody else's. Now, the Tillaisthanam, which is there in his name, is because Nataraja performed this cosmic dance, and it was done in a part of Tamil Nadu, which was Mr. Karunanidhi had said he wants to blow it up with a cannon, and he took it over. He nationalized it. But fortunately, I went to Supreme Court and got it quashed. And so that's one of the holy places which which represents this Shiva's cosmic presence. And he will, of course, I don't want to enter into and take away time from him, but I think he has done a study on how old Hindu Rashtra is. So I'd like him to, I'd like to suggest to him that a lot of people want to know where our history began. And were we a Hindu Rashtra, or we are just a set of scattered kingdoms? So the unity of India, the Hindustani character of India, all these things are being part of his research, and we all look forward to hearing him, and then we'll follow up with questions. Over to Narendra Bhai. This Narendra Bhai, by the way, is a nice guy, not the Narendra Bhai. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Swamy. First of all, I'd like to extend my special thanks to you, Mr. Dr. Swamy, and the team at the VHS, and Mr. Swaminathan from Chennai for having me in this esteemed, for this esteemed discussion. So the topic we have chosen is the history of Hindustan, and the history that we are going to talk about is also the civilization that we have is also the oldest continuous civilization. Now, this is a fact. The fact that ours is a continuous civilization has not been appreciated by a lot of historians, and I'll come to that particular topic very shortly. Before I go into the main topic, I also want to summarize the current state of things with respect to our history. I won't take a lot of time. I know people have talked about our history, European history, and the distortions that have happened here. In fact, in this very same channel, there is a talk by Dr. Raj Vedam and Dr. Swamy on the distortions of Indian history. So I'm not going to take a lot of time, but I want to set some context into what our history is and why this is a distortion, because only if I set the stage there will we go into what is our history. So our history starts, the history as we know, as it is taught in our schools, and which is widely appreciated by the public, is a history that starts with Aryan invasion. So there are a few facts to note here. Aryans are a race. Aryans came from Central Asia. They came from Central Asia to India. They invaded India. This invasion happened in 1500 BC. This is the template, with which we were taught. And I want to talk about the impact of this particular statement, what we just saw. It had an impact on me. In fact, I want to talk about my personal journey as well in this context. But for a large part of our Indian population, of our students, the impact is that we're told that language that we speak, for a lot of Indians.
Narendran, sorry to bother you. Narendran, sorry to bother you.
Languages. And suddenly we know that, if we believe in the Aryan invasion theory, the language that we speak is an import. It is not a native language. If you believe in the Aryan invasion theory, the religion that we follow, which is Sanatana Dharma, is also an import. It is not a native, religion. The culture,
Naren,
I think you have some internet problem. Can you move? I think there is an internet issue on your end. Your picture is frozen. Can you move to a place where there is a better signal, because we're not getting your audio properly at all? I'm sorry about it.
Oh, sure. Sorry about that. 1 minute, 1 second.
Sorry, folks. Just give us a few minutes and we'll just get it back. So just
really sorry about that. Yeah, really sorry about that.
No, okay.
Because it's an important topic, I don't want.
Yeah, just for the benefit of our viewers, we are having some
coming out
technical
any better
issues.
now?
We are trying to rectify it.
Or is it? Should I?
Yeah, you can start now. It is slightly better.
Okay.
But your video is still bad.
Uh-oh.
The video is still bad. But let's see. I will interrupt you again if there is an issue. But so excuse me for that. Okay. Let's just
my apologies. I didn't think this would be a problem. Okay. Apologies there. And so what I was talking about is a summary of the Aryan invasion theory and the impact it has on common public. So we tend to believe that the culture that we follow is an import. The language that we speak is an alien language. The religion, the Sanatana Dharma that we actually follow is also an alien, something that is alien. Not only that, the invasion framework makes people believe that certain people displaced, the so-called Aryans displaced the Dravidians who happened to be in North India at that time, according to the colonial theory. So we not only follow an alien culture, but we also displace the local people and took away their what is otherwise their rightful existence. This is a very powerful notation. This is a very powerful concept here, which has been ingrained in our consciousness. Now, I want to talk about what is wrong, what is a distortion. Again, I won't spend a lot of time. I'm of the opinion that history should be backed up by facts, no matter whether it is written by Max Muller or William Jones or whichever colonial powers or whatever their powers are. There has to be a semblance of evidence. So it has to be backed up by literature, by archaeology, by genetics, by anthropology. Now, it is not enough if we back it up with individual disciplines, but we also have to approach with a multidisciplinary approach. All these approaches will have to back each other. So the facts that we find from literature will have to be supported by archaeology, which will have to be supported by genetics, which will have to be supported by anthropology, and so on and so forth. And only then we can say, this is a proper history. Now, I'll talk about distortions very quickly. Why do I call this a distortion? Number one, let's take literature. Before William Jones, who propounded the theory of the language theory, which is the Indo-European languages, about 12 languages, he said, are part of the same family, and Sanskrit belongs to this particular family. If you go back in time 250 years ago, there is absolutely no text that you can find on earth, whether this is in Sanskrit or any vernacular language or a Persian or a Central Asian language, you will not find an invasion or a migration narrative. Which means any issue about invasion and migration is a product of the last 250 years. This alone to me is sufficient enough to understand that even though according to them this happened about 3,500 years ago, there is no evidence of it. In fact, we find evidence to the contrary. The world's oldest body of literature, which is the Rig Veda, actually talks about Saraswati as the center of our civilization, which is the essence of our topic today. In fact, they do not talk about having come from another region. In fact, Central Asia is a very cold country. When they settled down, Rajasthan was a desert. It was impossible for them to get acclimatized and propound a very lofty civilization. And if they had done that, they would not have had an Alzheimer's disease. They would not have forgotten their ancestry. So there is absolutely no evidence from a literature standpoint. Let's go to archaeology. Now, when the Max Mullers of the world propounded this theory based on literature, they just came up with something and said, based on language, there is this Aryan invasion. Mortimer Wheeler, who happened to be the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, using his position and authority, he said that based on a few skeletons that he found in the Indus Valley civilization, he said, look, this is the work of Indra. Indra is to be blamed. And by extension, what he meant was Aryans are to be blamed for this invasion. So for a time, the world believed that we had a language theory to support Aryan invasion. We have an archaeological theory to support this invasion. But it turns out that archaeology does not support it. Further evidence, further research on the skeletons conclusively proves that there has been no invasion. In fact, so much so that even David Reich, who is a genetist from the Harvard School, actually has claimed in his book that archaeology does not support an invasion framework or an invasion theory. So archaeology debunks it. Let's talk about genetics, and I'll give probably more evidence to it later. But suffices to say that there is absolutely no evidence to say Arya as a race, Dravidian as a race. And when you look at India, it is impossible to stratify our people, whether they are Brahmins or Kshatriyas or Vaishyas or Shudras, to actually stratify them across the genetic racial lines. Genetics does not support the notion that this is a race. In fact, I would even go to the latest. There is only one skeleton on which a DNA test has been performed. This is what is called as a Rakhigarhi woman. And on this particular lady, they did a DNA test, a whole body genome test. And this test reveals that there has been no foreign genetic invasion. So when you look at the genes of this particular lady, she represents the population of the local people in the Indus region, Rakhigarhi being part of the Indus civilization. And that's, the theory states, the scientific proof actually shows that there has been no invasion of gene pool either from West Asia or from Central Asia. So all this clearly means that there has been no infusion of culture, no infusion of religion, no infusion of thought, no infusion of any of the ideologies as we practice today. Everything is a cooked up and concocted story. Now, you may ask, it's one thing to say that this is all concocted, but we need to have a story. We need to understand what our real history is. And this is where I have made an attempt. I'll start with a beautiful African proverb. The proverb actually says, until the lions have their own history, the tail of the hunt will always go to the hunter. So we are the lions, and the hunters, the colonial powers, have given us the road, and we had our own history. And like I said, I believe in a history based on scientific evidence, not just based on individual opinion. Now, before I quickly go into this whole series of what our history is, I also want to talk about the impact that this kind of a narrative, creates on people like me, as an example. I was born in this village called Tillaisthanam, which is a beautiful village on the banks of River Kaveri. And like anybody, I really wanted to escape. I really wanted to go to the US. I always believed that, the many ails, India was a populous nation, India's economy was poor. There was a lot of thoughts that were ingrained into me as an average student. Mind you, this was 1980s, 1990s, before the liberalization kicked in. And the only panacea for me was to go to the US and get my education there and be done with it. So my association to this country has, one could argue that it was not that, great. And this is a theme you'll find with common people today. And this is the result of the history that we study here. And every strange twist of instances, I ended up being in Dr. Swamy's class. In fact, Dr. Swamy was a teacher. I distinctly remember the day when I took one of the subjects, which was an economic subject on Asian India and Asian China comparative economics. And what Dr. Swamy said, which is now a very popular theory, which is based on Angus Madison's research, OECD and Angus Madison's research, is that India had the highest GDP for about not just 1 year, 2 years, or 10 years, or 20 years, but for 1700 years. Right from AD 1 to AD 1700, India's GDP was one of the highest in the world. China caught up with India briefly towards the later half of the second millennium, but you get the story there. Now, that alone is not a very interesting thing. In fact, Swamy's lecture was always engrossing, but he would give us tons of books for us to read, to go home, and it was very difficult for us to go through all the materials. But those materials carried the necessary proof. Okay. Sorry, is my video still a problem?
Yeah, it's still a problem, but audio is fine. Let's just proceed. The audio is fine.
Let's keep.
Yeah, so sorry about that. Yeah, okay, so what I was saying, Angus Madison's research, right, which is now quite popular now. Now, what Dr. Swamy told us is the GDP, the fact that we had 1700 years of highest GDP growth could not have come out of the blue. This has to be based on a technology advancement. Our GDP had its basis on technology advancements. So when you look at shipbuilding as an example, ours was one of the biggest shipbuilding industries before the colonial powers actually came to India. In fact, the Declaration of American Independence was actually signed on an Indian ship. Not many people know about it. The cotton textile industry, we had one of the biggest textile industries in the whole world. In fact, there's even a book titled How India Clothed the Entire World. In fact, we gave such a scare to the British textile industry that they had to impose sanctions on us and literally, stop the imports. Similarly, if you go to jewelry, if you go to many, the diamond industry, India had a monopoly before the 16th century. So one after the other, if you look at our industries, be it metallurgy, zinc, copper, iron smelting, and ores and other things, we had a very strong technology to back up this GDP growth. And just like how US is a technologically advanced nation, and hence it has a GDP, a strong GDP, India was the superpower at that time. And this was a very stellar point. And Dr. Swamy did not stop there. He actually went one step further and said the physical infrastructure had to be good in order for the technology to be advanced. For example, when you look at Indian school systems, we had about 1 lakh schools in each presidency. The British were awestruck. For anybody who's interested, you can see the beautiful tree. There's a book by Dharampal which talks about the state of Indian education just before the British actually came in here. The British actually spoiled our education and cut the beautiful tree. We had one of the advanced sciences. We had one of the advanced mathematics, and all of this meant that our civilization had a very strong, and all of this led to a strong GDP. Now, what struck me on that day, and in fact, the book is actually a provocation that happened on that particular night, is that how come I had 22 years of formal education in India? I did my master's in India before I went to the US. How come I did not know any of this fact? How come all of this has been hidden in plain sight while a counter narrative, while a negative narrative has been superimposed on us as, by the educators? And this system continues even today, unfortunately. So this is the premise in which I started this research. The book Saraswati Epoch. I have tried to bring multiple disciplines. So this is the book here. I have tried to bring lens from literature, from archaeology, from genetics, anthropology, sociology. There are about 700 citations in a history book, and so that sort of I've taken pains to weave them together. All right. It's one thing to say we don't have a history, the history is negative. It's another thing to say, look, this is our history. So I'll start with what our history should be, or at least the way we look at it, the way we should be looking at. We'll start with the time when time itself did not exist, right? This was a time before the universe was born. Roughly about 13.7 billion years ago, the universe was in the seed form, and our Rig Veda actually called, the 10th mandala calls this the Hiranyagarbha, or the seed. This is where all the energy, the matter, and the consciousness was actually engrossed in the seed form. And out came, like a big bang, the Srishti happened, and our universe sprung forward. 4.5 billion years later, the Earth, Mother Earth, actually sprung up, and the first signs of biology actually came 3.8 billion years ago. About 500, half a billion years ago, there's an explosion of animal kingdom, and about 60 million years ago, monkeys, the first of the primate monkeys, actually came to the Earth. Now, why this is important is I'm going to take the view that humans evolved from monkeys as a species, and that is the story that we want to take. But there are two narratives here. The modern human species, which is Homo sapiens. There's only one species of humans, by the way, while other animals have multiple species, which is very important for us to note. So there's only one species, this Homo sapiens species. Two theories. One theory states that we originated in Africa, in East Africa. And these people actually migrated out of Africa onto Arabia, and then to India and to other parts of the world. We call this as the out of Africa theory. Contrast this to the other major theory, which is called the multi-regional theory. This theory states that human evolution happened in multiple places across the planet. In fact, when you look at India, there are evidence to support this particular theory. In fact, there are two skeletons called Ramapithecus and Shivapithecus, roughly, a few million, 6 to 12 million years ago, which was formed, which actually tells us, which shows that the evolution between a half monkey and a half human. So in other words, the process of making of the humans was actually in place at multiple regions. But the predominant narrative, the scientific view that holds water today, is the out of Africa theory. And hence, I've also taken the out of Africa theory as a fundamental basis for the narrative and the discussion. So roughly about 100,000 years ago, the population, the humans from Africa, they moved to Arabia, and then from Arabia, they come to India. Now, one thing we have to realize is that it is from India that one group moves to Southeast Asia and then to Australia. Another set of people move to China, Russia, and then through Siberia, they land in North America and populate the Americas. And then another group actually went from India to Europe. This is called the secondary migration. So one of the biggest, in fact, this goes against the migration theory that we have been hearing all along. India has been home to what is called as a secondary migration, and this is the migration out of India. Nothing to do with Aryan invasion theory. The time frames we are talking about is about 30,000, 40,000 years ago. So picture yourself 30,000 years ago, where you have the human population, and this population has entered into India. In fact, in India, you have Homo erectus, the previous precursors of modern humans. They were also living in India. And you find Homo sapiens occupying the coastal regions of India. And also you find evidence of them in Shon Valley, in Bhimbetka, in Narmada Valley, in several parts of India. They started occupying various regions. Now, these are by design hunter-gatherers. The people who settled down, they didn't have the lofty civilization, they didn't have the philosophies, they didn't have the roots that we are talking about today. Something remarkable happened. Out of the many people who settled across different regions, there is one group of people who propounded a lofty civilization, which is what we call as the Indus Valley civilization. I should actually call this as the Saraswati civilization, and I'll give you reasons for that later. But picture yourself that this is the civilization which advanced much more than any other population who had settled in different parts of the country. And I will take the Rig Veda as an example here. According to the Vedas, now one of the ways by which to analyze the history of the Vedas is to look at the chronology and look at there are 10 mandalas in the Rig Vedas, and the oldest mandala is actually the 6th mandala. I'm taking Shrikant Talagiri's research here and David Frawley's research here. And when you look at the 6th mandala, the predominant settlements have been around the Saraswati, what is called as the Saraswati Drishadvati Valley. Okay, in fact, the Rig Veda calls this as a Nabha Prithvi. Nabha means navel, Prithvi is earth, which means according to them, this is the center of the earth. And this is the region in which the oldest of the Rig Vedic culture, started forming together. And this is the region which roughly corresponds to Kurukshetra, Taneshwar, and you can say all the way up to Indraprastha. So that region is also called Brahmavarta. The later Manusmritis and other periods actually call this as the Brahmavarta period. But this is the epicenter of the first culture according to the literary evidence. Now, from here on, as we progress, as we look at the Rig Veda, when we look at the later mandalas, mandala number 2, mandala number, and you progress towards the last mandala, which is mandala number 10, you find that more and more river names are actually added up, all the way up to River Kabul in Afghanistan and down to the Vindhyas. We call this region as the Aryavarta. The Aryavarta is the region between the Kabul River and the River Narmada. You can think of it, that's a whole expanse of the Vedic people, right? And the Rig Veda also calls Saraswati as its home. In fact, the Rig Veda mentions Saraswati 72 times, according to Dr. S. Kalyanaraman. Now, this is in contrast to Ganga, which is mentioned only twice. The Yamuna is mentioned only thrice. This goes on to say that the entire settlement has been centered around the Saraswati River. Now, one might ask, is Saraswati a real river? I'll come to that question in a minute. Yes, the Saraswati was an actual river that flew from the Himalayas and drained herself in the Arabian Sea, but we'll wait for that for a minute. Now, let's flip this coin. Let us understand what does archaeology say here. There are about 2,500 discoveries made, what we call as Indus settlements. There are about 2,500 of them. 62% of the settlements are actually along the banks of River Saraswati. This goes on to show, in fact, some of the oldest cities of Indus Valley civilization, Birana, which is about 9,000 years, roughly about 9,000 years old, is on the banks of River Saraswati. The biggest of the cities, which is Rakigari, is also on the tributaries of River Saraswati. So, which also means that according to archaeology, according to Indus Valley settlements, Saraswati happens to be the major place where our population had settled. There's a very interesting analogy that B.B. Lal, archaeologist B.B. Lal, has given in his work. So you draw a map of Rig Veda, the Rig Vedic times based on the rivers that are mentioned in the various mandalas. And you get a picture of a map starting from Kabul in Afghanistan all the way to Narmada. In fact, Mahishmati, which is from the film Bahubali, is actually the southern outpost of this Aryavarta or the Vedic people. Now you get a map. And then you draw another map of the Indus Valley settlements based on whatever discoveries and discoveries we have from the archaeology. And you juxtapose these two maps, and what you will find is that there is a remarkable coincidence in terms of the Vedic map and the archaeology map. This alone goes on to prove that the people who followed the Vedas and the people upon whom we do the archaeological discovery are one and the same. In fact, Dr. Frawley actually calls this, we have come to know of this as a Frawley paradox, which is, if you think that people who gave us the Vedas do not have anything to do with archaeology, and if the people who gave us archaeology do not have anything to do with the literature, how do you reconcile it? Right? The only way to reconcile is to admit the fact that, these two people have to be the same. And I'll talk about more evidences down the road when we talk about continuous civilization. But the fact of the matter is, here is the set of people, the Indus Valley people, and the Rigvedic people, and they are one and the same. And this is the essence of our history. Now, our culture, which started at Drishadvadi, spread across the various parts of our country. In fact, I aspire to write another book called the Ganga Epoch, as to what happened after the demise of River Saraswati, which happened around 4,000 years ago, roughly about 2000 BCE. There was a 200-year drought, and river Sutlej actually started to drain herself. Before draining into Indus, Sutlej used to drain into Saraswati, and because of a tectonic shift, Sutlej actually moved northward and started draining into Indus. So essentially, the water flow started receding into Saraswati, and the 200-year drought, which happened around year 2000, was a telltale sign that the civilization collapsed. And what happened was people moved to other parts of the country, and the Ganga became a more prominent place. In fact, I want to trace this history in a future volume called the Ganga Epoch, to talk about how this culture spread all over the country. Now, I want to talk very briefly about how this culture also had an influence in Iran. In fact, the very name Iran comes from, if you look at Zoroastrians, and if you go to their Zend Avesta, in their Vendidad, there is a mention of a place called Arya Vajra, which translates into the land of the Aryans, which is like the Aryavarta for them. So they say that one of the places for them is actually Hapta Hindu. Now remember, in Iran, the word S is always replaced with H, which is why Sindhu became Hindu and Saraswati became Harhwati. So they actually acknowledge the fact that they came from India, and this is a very important thing for us to note. In fact, if you look at Zoroastrian gods, the Mitra, Varuna, and Yama, they all share a common ancestry. Now, one of the things I want to highlight here is that if you trace the genealogy, again, when you look at the Rig Vedas, you can approach them from a genealogy. We don't look at kingdoms in Rig Veda. This is not a very common way of analyzing it, but you could do this. In fact, I'm taking citations from Dr. Frawley. Manu happens to be the oldest of the progenitors of the kingdom. So from Manu there are two dynasties, which is the Chandra Vamsha dynasty and the Shurya Vamsha dynasty. From the Chandra Vamsha dynasty comes the Puru lineage, Puru and then Kuru, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. The Bharata, India actually gets a name from Bharata, from the Bharata dynasty, which all happens to be the Chandra Vamsha dynasty. Similarly, the Shurya Vamsha dynasty, which is where Lord Ram actually belongs to, is part of the Ikshvaku dynasty, and Ikshvaku was actually a son of Manu. So it is very important for us to realize that these were the two prominent kingdoms that emerged from this civilization, and these kingdoms later spread. In fact, the early Ikshvaku dynasty was also centered on Saraswati. It is only later that the epicenter of it moved towards Ayodhya, and one part of Nemi Madhava actually moved to Mithila, which is the border of Bihar and Nepal. So the earlier civilizations, had its center, had its roots, had its genesis in the Saraswati civilization. The great grandson of Manu, there are two grandsons called Ayu and Amavasu. They started the expansion. In fact, there are clear signs that using Saraswati as the epicenter, they actually migrated towards west. One of them went west, one of them came east, and this was as a result of which the kingdoms actually expanded. Seventh generation from Manu is a king called Yayati, and Yayati had multiple sons. I will summarize it. I'll keep it very simple. Two of them, the Anus and the Druhyus, they did not settle in India. So this started an internecine war. In fact, just like how Kauravas and the Pandavas had a fight, the Anus and the Druhyus had a fight with the Puru dynasty, which is the main dynasty that started ruling the Vedic people. So the Vedic people were also called the Devas, and the Anus and the Druhyus came to be known as the Asuras. So in fact, when you go to Iran, the word Ashura is very prominent. In fact, their scripture is called, their god is called Asura Mazda. Asura became Ahura, right? So basically, S becomes H. So their god is Asura, and their enemy, in fact, they call their enemy as Angira Deva. Okay, so Devas are the enemies of Zoroastrians, and Asura are devils. Yeah, correct. And the Asuras are actually the enemies of the Devas. So you get the picture here. And there are a lot of correlation, from Zoroastrians. In fact, they even have the Punal ceremony, the Janyu, as we call it. So there's a lot of correlation between these two cultures. And in fact, the Parsis, when they come back and settle down, in a way, it feels like they're coming back to their home country. That's effectively how, we look at it. So our culture, our civilization, which started on the banks of River Saraswati and spread across all over the country, also had its impact in other regions. I've talked a little bit about how it had beyond Iran, but suffices to say for this discussion that we'll leave it at Iran. Now, this is roughly what I map as the oldest civilization and the oldest culture. The second topic is the continuity of this culture. This is very important. Not many people can talk about their continuity. Now, when you go to the Americas, for example, close to 99% of the native Indians have been wiped out. In fact, there was even a program where the British government, the government of Massachusetts at that time, gave 12 pounds to anybody who comes with a scalp of a native Indian. So this was an official program before it became fashionable for the colonial powers to talk about equality and gender and other things. This is how they actually ruled. If you go to the Middle East, we all know the story. You cannot name who are there were many gods. In fact, it is even stated there were 360 gods before the advent of Islam, but you cannot name any one of them today. You cannot find a symbol. You cannot find a picture. If you go to Europe, the Greek civilization, Roman civilization, you can possibly find them in museums, but that's about it. Now, compare this with the Indian civilization. Despite the travesty of time, despite centuries of attack, despite the centuries of pillage, Indian civilizations continue to talk about our own culture, our own people, our own religion, and our own values. And in fact, we actually profess many of this. And I want to argue that a lot of this actually comes to us from the Saraswati people. I call the Indus Valley civilization as the Saraswati civilization for the reason that the entire, as I said, 62% of the civilization was on the banks of River Saraswati, and hence we should be actually calling it the Saraswati civilization. Anyway, so coming back, there were few telltale symbols and cultural continuity that I want to actually talk about. Let me start with agriculture. In fact, we all know that India is an agrarian society. Even today, a major part of our income actually GDP comes from agriculture. And we can trace the genesis of the first agricultural setting back to Meherga, which is part of the Indus Valley civilization or the Saraswati civilization. They were the first to domesticate cattle. In fact, many of the farming techniques that they used are still used in India. The kind of plowing techniques that they follow are still in vogue. Similarly, when you talk about textile industry, they were the first to invent cotton. They were the first to invent buttons. They were the first to invent spinning wheel. They were the first to invent textile. I mean, the block printing of textiles. In fact, when you have block printing on textiles, this was a calico movement that all of us must be familiar now. It has its genesis in the Saraswati civilization. I don't know whether there is a conscious connection or not. When during the independence movement, the first Indian flag, which was designed by Pingali Vengaya, had the spinning wheel in the middle of the flag. In fact, the spinning wheel started to represent our independence movement. And we all know how Gandhiji used it as a symbol of resistance, for the textile industry. And you can see the subconscious connection going back to the Indus Valley people, the Saraswati people here. Talk about yoga, you find many seals with yogic postures, which makes us believe that yoga is also a product of the Saraswati people. Let me talk about Ayurveda. Now, there are evidence of the use of shilajit and many raw materials in which Ayurvedic concoctions are prepared. And we find evidence, despite 4,000, 5,000 years of passage, we find Ayurvedic concoctions in the Saraswati, from the archaeological evidence. So we let's take Namaste, for example. During pandemic, it was fashionable for everybody to talk, to not handshake, but give Namaste, right? And this Namaste is also a symbol from the Saraswati people. Now, a lot of youngsters these days are very shy of wearing bindi. And in fact, I tell them, if there's one reason I know of why we should have a bindi, it is because, this is a 5,000-year-old tradition. Yes, bindi actually comes to us from the Saraswati people. So does playing chess, playing dice. The measurements, when you talk about measurements before the advent of, the SI and the metric system, Angula, which is approximately 1.73 centimeter, or Vitasti or Dhanu, which is approximately 6 feet. These were the metric system used all over the country. In fact, if you go to Tanjore Brigadishwara temple, Tanjore is where I belong to, and we have a magnificent temple, the Brigadishwara temple. And that temple has its measurement, which can be traced back to the Indus, civilization. Not just Tanjore temple. If you traverse all across India, major palaces, major temples have been constructed on the basis of these metrics. In fact, there's even an interesting anecdote, an interesting thing to note. The Taj Mahal traces its ancestry, the measurements of Taj Mahal traces its ancestry to the Saraswati civilization. In fact, when Shah Jahan, who commissioned the building of this to a certain Ustad Lahori, he must have come from Lahore, I believe, but he was a Persian. So in his blueprint, his metrics are all given in the form of what is called as gaz. Gaz is also gajam, as we call it. It's another metric, another measurement system. So his blueprint actually talks about gauze, but when you actually measure it in gauze, it is illogical. You just cannot arrive at it. So if it says 3 by 3 and you go and measure it, it just doesn't work. Whereas if you measure it in the Saraswati system, whether it is Vitasti or whether it is Dhanu, then all the measurements actually come to. So you can imagine the chief engineer of the Taj Mahal making such a fundamental mistake makes us wonder, what really could have happened. Did they really build it? I will leave it at that, and I don't want to conjecture too much beyond that. But this is a very important thing for us to note. So bottom line, we can go on and on. In fact, in the book, I have talked about close to about 3 chapters that talks about the various continuity between what we have, including the dhoti that we have, the angavastra that we have, the plaited hair, the rangoli. You can go on and talk about these connections. And this is the culture, this is the civilization that we belong. Our civilization was propounded in India, in our own country, and this is the civilization that we are following today. And it has got a remarkable continuity, which we should all protect, preserve, and pass on to the next generation. And with that, I conclude my speech here. Jai Hind.
Okay, good. Excellent. Before I hand it over to my colleagues to ask questions, let me ask a couple of questions myself, or rather bring to your notice some things. In the Ramayana, you have the Pushpak Viman, which took Rama back to Ayodhya. And some people have done research recently, and they have found that there is an old ancient book called Vimana Shastra. And I was curious to know what fuel was used in it. And the fuel that is described in that book for a plane to fly is mercury. And I was extremely surprised, So I raised it with an American scholar. And he said, my God, we are doing research on how to move from these Arabian fuels to a new fuel, and we're thinking that the most economical, simple, but long-lasting would be mercury. So the mercury research is presently on very secretly in the United States, but is there in our Vimana Shastra. So I also, of course, calculus was Bhaskaracharya, which went to Leibniz. Leibniz copied it and passed it off his own and sent it to Newton, who then made it his own. So there's so much that was discovered, and which we have not discovered yet, and we must need to claim it. So anyway, you have already done a enormous amount of work, but at some stage you should get into this question of calculus and how do you have Vimana Shastra, and what was how far does it go? You should get a copy of it, and if I can get a copy, I'll send it to you. But sure. I think these are the things that need to be taught to our younger generation.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. And I also believe that many of our ancient scriptures continue to be in Sanskrit, and the knowledge of Sanskrit is going to play a vital role because you need a first-hand, information. You need to be able to read the source as it's, in its true form, in order for us to get the meaning out of it. So, yeah, I think it is time we did research on these.
By the way, Sanskrit is being peddled as one of the languages, main languages for artificial intelligence. Have you heard that?
Yeah, that's right, because it follows the Baker's-Naur form. I mean, structurally, when you look at it, the composition of Sanskrit grammar is very close to the language that computers follow, which is BCNF. So, I mean, it's definitely more friendly than other languages.
Narendra ji, I have a question because many viewers have raised it. They want to know how they can get a copy of the book of yours and what is the cost and where it is available. So before we go into your topic, many viewers have been asking. In fact, since we announced the program, they've been asking. So could you just enlighten our viewers who are the publishers and all that?
Sure. Garuda is the publisher. So the book is available in Garuda Prakashan's website. The book is also available in Amazon. There is even a Kindle edition available. And if you just go to that amazon.in and search for Saraswati a book, make sure the spelling is right. Sarasvati, not THI. Sometimes Amazon doesn't return back with the right information. But it is available. Both the Kindle edition and the print editions are available in Flipkart, in Amazon, and other sources.
Naren, quick question for you. I have a question on. I have some comment on the screen.
Sure.
Your thoughts on this first Paleolithic tool found by that cook, right? Was that? Do you have any comment on this? Or are you aware of this?
No, I'm not aware of this, but I'm aware of Paleolithic tools that are, many discoveries that have been made, including, near Adichanallur. My understanding is that, I always believe that early humans settlements had been there in India, and there has been population. People have lived in India all along, and when I say people, I'm talking about ancient people having lived in different parts of the country, and we have a continuous occupation. India has been an epicenter of population, and so there has been a continuous occupation in different parts of the country. And it is only, the whole premise is that while the whole of the country had been occupied, there's only one group which actually propounded a culture, which became prominent, and that is the culture that we follow today. And that's the premise of the discussion that we are having.
Okay. One other question is, there's one other question here that says, is the Saraswati River the same that is visible in Sangam, Prayagraj, Allahabad?
Okay.
Technically, we know that Saraswati is flowing underground, correct? That's what.
Correct. Yeah. So they say Saraswati is Antarvahini in Allahabad. But when we look at the satellite mappings or any of the evidence behind this, the flow of the rivers emanates from the Himalayan Shivalik hills, and we can trace this trajectory through Rajasthan into Gujarat and draining herself in the Arabian Sea. I do not believe that there is a connection to the Allahabad underground, although there is a theory. There are people who talk about it. In fact, one of the scholars of Ramayana actually told me, if I believe it's Dr. Ranganji, who told me that in Ramayana, at Allahabad, we don't talk about a Triveni Sangama, we only talk about Ganga Yamuna Sangamam there. So the fact that Saraswati got added as a Triveni Sangama must have been a later day addition after the collapse of the Saraswati civilization. In fact, people from Saraswati would have taken that ideology when they transformed their epicenter into Ganga, and it's said as a Antarvahini. But I don't think there is any evidence to support that from a scientific viewpoint. That's my view.
And can you throw some light on the Kirakadai and its relationship with Saraswati civilization? And after this, I have one small anecdotal thing to say, but
sure.
Just a question from Srinath.
Sure, yeah. Now, one of the things that I want to highlight is that even though I've been talking about the Saraswati civilization or Indus civilization pretty much belonging to the northern part up to the Vindhyas, we also know there has been extensive trade network between these people, whether they traded with their western neighbors in Dilmam and other parts. They also traded with the kg of Kolar goldfields. So part of my theory is that people of Saraswati have had extensive trade network. It is not like other civilization peoples did not know anything about it. So there has been a cultural transformation or infusion between regions, although there is no clear signals that they all belong to the same culture or same civilization. So pockets of civilization lived outside of the Saraswati civilization influence, but they have been trading with each other. So you find remnants of certain aspects of their philosophies and their way of worship and the way of burial, etc., into the other regions. So that's what my belief is. We obviously need more data, more evidence to understand how this what is the correlation, what is the exact connection between Kirti and the Indus Valley population.
Dr.
To me,
Swamy,
this is more of an influence than of a direct being part of the direct network.
Dr. Swamy, one important anecdote. In Kanchi Matam, the Acharyas are called Indra Saraswati. No other Matam has it. Very unique. That Kanchi Mat has the Indra Saraswati always in their names. That's a very unique.
Mr. Narendran, I have one very interesting comment. You said about the measurement metrics of those days, Saraswati era, which was Gaj and Angul. Gaj is nothing but yard, which is 3 feet, and 1760 Gaj is equal to 1 mile those days. But the interesting thing that I want to bring it from history is in 11th century or 12th century, during Prithvi Raj's time or Muhammad Ghori's time, how Muhammad Ghori got killed. There has been a poet called Chand Bardai, and Chand Bardai wrote a book called Prithvi Raj Raso, describing the life of Prithvi Raj Chauhan, but how the Prithvi Raj Chauhan, at the demonstration of his Shabd Vedi Kala, killed Muhammad Ghori. He says when Muhammad Ghori called Prithvi Raj Chauhan to demonstrate his art of the bow and arrow, Chand Bardai gave him a hint in this language, and that says, Char Bans 24 Gaj, Angul Asht Praman, Ta Upar Sultan hai, Mat Chuko Chauhan. Now, Char Bans is 4 bamboos, and 24 Gaj is 24 yards. And Angul, this Angul is 8 anguls. Above that is Muhammad Ghori. So by knowing this, by measuring this distance, Prithvi Raj Chauhan killed Muhammad Ghori. So this measurement matrix that you mentioned about is, yes, it is found in our history not very long ago, just about 800 or 900 years ago.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, sir. I just want to clarify that Gaz is not part of Indus metric. Angula is, Vitasti is, Danu is. Gaz is a Persian metric. Of course, the Afghans also followed. Gaz was very influential when the Sultans and the Mughals actually came in. They took their metric system into us, and we downright Kanchipuram saris are actually measured in Gajam, right? Gaz is but thank you for that anecdote. It's quite interesting to know that.
Yeah.
There's a question about our ancestors were experts in making gold in laboratory. How do you see it in today's reality?
Well, I can only talk about it in the context of Saraswati people. In fact, they were voracious consumers of gold. Indians are not just gold consumers without any reason. In fact, there is no known source of gold within the Saraswati region. In fact, the gold that they had were actually, it came from Kolar goldfields in Karnataka, not far from where I live. And how do we say that it came from Kolar is because that particular gold had a composition of silver and gold. It is not a pure gold. There's a little bit of silver, behind it, and it is very unique. When we find gold ornaments in the Saraswati civilization, it goes without saying that it had a kg of influence. Number one. Number two, the gold industry was so sophisticated and so widespread in the Indus civilization. In fact, these people were the ones who knew how to measure gold. They invented touchstone, which is where, when you scratch gold, it gives different color. And that is how we find out whether this is a 14 karat gold or a 22 karat gold or a 24 karat gold. And that also comes to us from the Saraswati people. So bottom line is, they were voracious consumers of gold. And that is possibly why India continues to be a major consumer of gold. That's all I can say. I cannot say much about the lab gold. Gold is not indigenous to the world. It actually came from outside because of meteorites. That's how when we trace metallurgy, they say gold is not indigenous to this world. Yeah, but that's all I can say. I don't want to hypothesize on the lab part of it.
There's one other question. What about the Aryan invasion myth perpetrated by Harvard professor Witzel? Do you have any comments on it?
Right. I mean,
it's older than the Harvard professor, by the way. I think it was even before Macaulay, I think. Aryan.
I think it was Macaulay
so
or Max Miller that started this myth, or probably around that time frame, I'm assuming. Right, Naren?
So maybe I'll spend 1 minute. I'll spend 1 minute tracing the history of it, the history of the Aryan invasion myth, right? So it started with William Jones, who came up with this PIE, or the Proto-Indo-European language. And he said Sanskrit and 11 other European languages had to have a common ancestry, and he called that language as a Proto-Indo-European. Max Muller, James Mill, and others who came in actually said, okay, now if this is a language, there has to be people, there has to be a region, and they said Central Asia is where this Proto-Indo-European language can be found. And hence the theory was formulated stating that, here is the common language. The common language had to be from outside India because it has connection to some of the European words, and Central Asia happens to be the region, and that's how it came as a Aryan invasion theory. Now, with respect to Witzel, of course, you can see that there is a dance of as more and more evidence comes into picture. There is, if you literally trace this, you will see that Aryan invasion has become Aryan migration now, down right to Tony Joseph, who has written a book on early Indians. You will see that they're talking about Aryan migration. Even Romila Thapar admits that there has been no invasion theory. So Professor Witzel also admits there is no invasion theory. Now, it is fashionable to talk about Aryan migration and not about Aryan invasion. And the latest genetic research, which happened in 2019, of which David Reich, Vagish Narasimhan, and there are about plenty of them who are part of that research, actually propagated the theory that, because of genetics, there is evidence to say that people came and settled in multiple waves. And this is the theory behind the latest Aryan invasion. You can call this as genetics invasion, Aryan invasion theory 2.0, which is what they are actually propagating. Now, this also has been put to rest by the DNA study that I talked about. So, bottom line, sir, whether it is Witzel, whether it is David Reich, whether it is Harvard School, whether it is any other school, one can thoroughly say that using literature, using archaeology, using genetics, we can hold our head high and prove that the invasion never happened, the migration never happened. Aryans, the Vedic people have been indigenous to this country, and that is what we need to realize. We need to remember. In fact, in the book, I've dealt with many of these, opposite view or Purva Paksha in detail. I've talked about who said what and what is a counter narrative to it.
Your title was a history of Hindustan for today. When did you? I have seen one from the Rig Veda, the reference to Hindustan. It was Hindustan a kind of a decentralized, loose getting together, or there was a concept that this Himalaya to Hindu Sagar? Some people say he to Hindu Sagar means a Himalaya, Hindu. The Hindu word came from Himalayas he and Hindu Sagar's Hindu. And Adi Shankara was the one who defined Dravida Shishu when he called himself as a Dravida Shishu. So the word Dravida also was not racial. Arya was also not racial. These were cultural concepts. And whether you subscribe to that, I would know.
Yeah, no, there are two views to the notion of India or Hindu. One is what you just described, sir, which is Himalaya and Hindu. I subscribe to the other view, which is there are two evidence to it. The first thing is the word Hindu is a derivative of Sindhu. People who belong beyond the borders of Sindhu River are called Hindus. And as I told you, in Zoroastrianism, the word S is replaced with a H. And there are two reasons to believe in this theory, because the so-called Aryans who went to Iran, they said our homeland is Hapta Hindu. Hapta Hindu means Sapta Sindhu. So this is where they recognize themselves as people who belong to the Sindhu region. And that is one of the main things to understand. The second one is there is epigraphic evidence from Darius, King Darius. One of the oldest references to the word in Hindu actually comes from that epigraphic, which belongs to about 500 BCE. So my belief is that we always called ourselves as Bharata Varsha. In fact, when we do our mantras, we actually say Bharata Varsha and Parshve Kante, and the word Hindu must have been a later appellation, is what the theory that I subscribe to, sir.
Well, let me see if I can look at what I found from actually from the Vedas themselves, the word Hindu, and send it to you.
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, I've seen it.
Dr. Swamy, a question for you. Like what Naren has said, a lot of people you've been propounding for so long, and Rajiv Malhotra, be it Francis Godway, or so many people.
Yeah.
In spite of so much of evidence, why is India continuing to follow this AIT nonsense, this other history? Why are we not going back to what the real history, like what Naren has written extensively about, Rajiv Malhotra has been campaigning extensively about, and every other authors, a lot of them who have studied Indian history, and what is holding us back in implementing this? Why can't we go back to true history? And your comments first, and then Naren, if you have any, please.
Sure.
Well, when the BJP government was formed, at that time, Smriti Irani was the education minister. She asked me, and I told her that you should set up a committee and knock all this rubbish that is being taught in our history books. And she did move in. Then she was transferred out. And the next education minister, I won't name him, he asked the bureaucrats to draw up a committee and set up a committee. And the committee was of the same people who had been propagating Aryan Dravidian theory and all that bakwas over the years. And they have been told that we want a different history. So they have just bought time, and it's not been done. There's been no determined effort by the Narendra Modi government to bring this to a conclusion and bring out a textbook. What you need is to bring out a textbook which is compulsory reading for the schools and colleges. Then the all that nonsense that has been spread so far, that would be wiped out, and the new textbooks would take their place. That's the way to do it. We haven't done it after 10 years. I hope we'll do it in the next round, and I'm sure that BJP will come back to power. Even if one or two people, I don't want them to see them back in power, but I'd like to see BJP back in power, because these are things which only the BJP government would do. And therefore, we have to now take this issue very seriously. And perhaps, with Naren and others, we should form a group of who would be a challenge to the usual history group that holds annual conferences.
Ramesh, just for your things on social media, there was a question few days back. Somebody asked who was Aurangzeb's father, and who was father of father and father. So Jahangir, Akbar, Shahjahan, Humayun, Babur, everybody knows in this country. And then the question was, who was Ram's father? He said Dashrath. Who was Dashrath's father? Nobody knows who was Dashrath's father. So that is for the Sanatani history. We don't know beyond one generation of Rama, but we know 10 generations of Mughals.
In the invaders.
Yeah.
Yeah, the invaders, yeah. In fact,
so Naren, your thoughts on the history? Your thought on our history books?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So I have two views here. Now, one is we should not look at Aryan invasion theory as a bygone. Talking about just people. It's a people tribe problem or a racial problem. In fact, we should see a template. What we see as Aryan invasion theory is a concocted theory of making the local people believe that there are oppressors and oppressed. Right, and this is to exploit and break India. And you see this pattern getting repeated. Just recently I attended a conference on Ramayana, where you have the Columbia School, which is actually going after the same narrative. They're coming up with concocted theories of they're trying to decentralize Valmiki. They're trying to say that there is no authoritative source for the Ramayana, and Rama is not a Maryada Purushan. Your Bharata can have multiple girlfriends. So these are the new things that are actually thrown in. And Rama stands for oppression, Sita stands for the oppressed, what not. Actually, this is like the whole pattern, what the concocted story and the myth that they actually perpetrate, and you have movies, you have media that actually stands proof to it. There are many books being written. People are given Padma Bhushan awards, for coming up with these theories, right? So the fact we should all acknowledge is Aryan invasion theory is very potent. The idea behind Aryan invasion theory is being applied by these scholars and researchers in various forms, and this is all helping them to actually denigrate India, to break India into multiple pieces. That's point number one. Point number two is we spend a lot of energy in understanding that this is a concocted history, this is a distorted history. But I would request that all the scholars come together and spend 10% of their effort in coming up with what should be the history. Now, it's one thing to say that the central government should enforce this, but if the central government turns around and says what is the history that we should supplement, we do not have a solution. Either the government should actually do this, or as scholars who are taking the lead should come together and form a chain and say that this is a version of truth that we would like to replace, as the colonial history should be replaced, and here is a history that should take its place. And I think we have not put a lot of efforts, and I would say that we should all come together and have a consensus amongst ourselves, before we can take this forward, is my humble opinion.
Dr. Swamy, one last point, and after that, Arvind, maybe you can Jagdish, if you have a question. Dr. Swamy, I think we've been planning. I think just before COVID, we were planning for a conference,
yes,
somewhere in Pune or something, about this topic. So maybe it is time that we can plan for next year to have a conference on Hinduism and Hindu Renaissance conference, and maybe we can have Naren, Francis Gautier, and Rajiv Malhotra. People like this, scholars can come and talk, and maybe it'll be a worthwhile thing to do, Dr. Swamy.
Absolutely.
Dr. Swamy, there's some viewers. Sorry, Ramesh.
No, go ahead. That's right. Next.
Dr. Swamy, some viewers have been saying here that you, Rajiv Malhotra, Narendra ji, and others should have a specific conference of scholars on the project of rewriting history. In fact, Dr. God from Siddharth God, also from Dallas, and others, somewhere in the next year, so that if the government is slow, at least you all put pressure and hold such a conference and create an awareness.
Sure. Definitely. I agree with you.
Yeah, another comment. Dr. Swamy, you mentioned about some education or HRD minister and others. In fact, there is an ex-HRD minister of the BJP government who proudly said, forget about against the charge that government was helping in rewriting history. He proudly said in a press conference, we have not yet changed a single sentence in the history textbook. I mean, a BJP minister saying so proudly that we have not changed a single line of any history textbook for students. So I don't know what background they come to power to just enjoy power and forget the basic ideology on which they were elected and the need of the nation.
Before we conclude, I have
I think you should find fault with who appointed him to this office.
Yeah, that's true.
Dr. Swamy, before we conclude, I have a political question. There is an identified set of people and organizations, both in India and abroad. You lived in the US and also in the US, for different reasons and different motives. They are against Hindu culture as such, whether Hindu Dharma or Sanatani Sanskriti or Hindutva. On the other hand, we also have innumerable number of cases where people are converting to Hinduism voluntarily in Europe and America and elsewhere. So in the light of what Mr. Narendran has described as history, if I link it, what do you think is the future holds for Hindutva?
See, there was an article, editorial by the editor of the Newsweek. You heard the Newsweek is a very famous American, weekly. In which the lady, I think her last name was Miller. She wrote a 3-page editorial for the Newsweek. And the heading was, "Now we are all going to be Hindus." Now, and there she went in and said, when I travel from the New York airport to the Manhattan, I see vast areas of graves, graveyards and graveyards and graveyards. The Hindus just burn their dead bodies. That's more scientific. Then she gives so many other examples. I said slowly people are beginning to adopt it. And I think, yes, we can push that a little more. And but most of all, first of all, we need a group of intellectuals who are united on various basics, you see. And one of them is, of course, our own history. What is the correct history? And then, of course, in what way we were ahead of everybody in science. For example, rockets were created by the Cholas, and then who was that who came to Muslim who invaded Tipu Sultan. He picked it up, and the British picked it up from him, because Tipu Sultan was a stooge of the French, and so he was defeated, and so the British took all that, and it's British are admitting it. You read any book on rocketry, they say we got it from India after the war with Tipu Sultan. So I don't think that these are things we can easily put together, and I agree with you. Perhaps our VHS should itself call a conference of cherry-picked historians or analysts who know history, and put them together and finally produce a book, and then start seeing that it is made into an official required book by the government.
Mr. Narendran, you are from AI. AI is your specialization. Maybe I can ask you a question. Can AI play a role in countering the anti-Hindutva campaign?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question. I've been actually thinking about it. There is one way by which AI will help us, and one way in which AI is going to be a counter. It's going to counter us in a big way. How AI can help us? In fact, I have done this personally. I've done this research. I've done this work. I fed the entire Valmiki Ramayana. I took it from a corpus, 20,000 slokas approximately, put it inside the English translation of it, and I asked questions on the AI algorithm. This is a technique called RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation, using GPT. Because using GPT, you can converse in natural language. So one of the things that is within our means, within our body of what we can achieve today, right now, is that you can push all the corpus of Indian knowledge system into a central body, and you can make it available just like ChatGPT. This is a private version of a ChatGPT, and this democratizes the access of our ancient scriptures, and the knowledge of Indian systems can actually move very fast. So all I can say is the technology is there. It needs to be funded. We can actually get it done. Now, the second major part I want to talk about, which is a negative, is that when we look at major systems such as GPT, the OpenAI and GPT-4, ChatGPT systems, these are trained on mountains of public data. And the public data is all about Wikipedia data. It is data from the internet, and they carry the bias. In fact, the whole of Aryan invasion theory, if you go to any of these systems, and actually I've not played with it, but I can bet that when you play with these systems, they're going to parrot the Aryan invasion theory, because what it has been fed with on a predominant narrative, of the inputs that has gone into it is all from the public domain. And so we are going to get marginalized, which is a very, very, very big problem for us. In fact, we are entering into an era, what is called a synthetic data generation, which means these AI machines will generate their own data, which will act as a feed. So you are getting into a vicious loop here, and we will fall behind in terms of our narrative. So one thing for us, we have to be very, very careful, and we have to be worried about. Another one, which is also a great liberator, which is this RAG technique, where we can build a version of ChatGPT and we can make our old systems available. Yeah, so it's like a knife. It cuts us both ways.
I think before Arvind winds up, I have a last question to Narendra ji. We talk about the Indian civilization or the Hindu civilization or the Saraswati civilization, one of the oldest and the longest continuous civilization. Just for the benefit of our viewers would like to know whether any other similar civilization as old as the Sindhu or Saraswati civilization existed in any other parts of the world.
Yeah,
and surviving. I mean, there have been like the pharaohs of Egypt and so on, but India, of the 45 civilizations that have been recorded, only one survives, and that is the Hindu civilization. All the other cultures have disappeared.
In fact, there are, if I take the time frame of Indus Valley civilization to as old as we take Birana as an example, it is about 9,000. It goes all the way to 9,000 years ago. And Meherga cattle rearing and farming came up roughly 7,000, 8,000 years ago. But there is a culture in Turkey called, in Near East, this is called Göbekli Tepe. And very interestingly, that culture predates what we know, at least from the scientific parlance. It predates the Aryan, the Saraswati civilization. But what Dr. Swamy, this is not a continuous civilization. In fact, the people who propounded those whatever artifacts that we are left with, people do not follow. Nobody knows what religion those people had, what did they worship, what was their culture, what did they eat. So, it is not a continuous culture is the important point here. And this is what makes India special. Rather than just being oldest, this is the oldest continuous civilization, and that what makes it a cherished place for all of us.
Right. Okay, thank you, Arvind.
Wonderful discussion today. It's so comprehensive that you started from the history of Hinduism also. Of course, as Dr. Swamy said, Rig Veda also finds, according to him, the word mention of Hindustan in Rig Veda in one form or the other. And I think what Dr. Swamy has been propagating for years, you have only given a further voice to that Indian history should be rewritten, and what we are dishing out to our young Indians is basically a complete false narration. And you also established that. Thank you very much. And for describing Saraswati culture as the central to the Rig Veda, based on Rig Veda, to the Hindu culture. And we welcome your efforts to write another book, Ganga Epoch. We look forward to that. And I would also like, before I conclude, by thanking to Dr. Swamy and others, please share the findings of the DNA test that you were talking about, the only DNA test which was done. You mentioned about the lady's name, and which has proved, and the link. We would like that to share with all of us. And thank you, Dr. Swamy. Wonderful complimentary discussion, and I think people must have really enjoyed. For almost 90 minutes we have gone through this, and certainly it will lead to the conference as suggested by Ramesh about the Indian history. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jagdish, for joining from USA, and Ramesh, of course, as usual, from USA. Thank the technical team led by Ashish Shetty, Swaminathan, Tejas Navalgul, Ishwar Iyer, Gadgi Rakesh, Vishal Mehta, Najesh Nair. Next Sunday, again, we'll be meeting with a new topic with Dr. Subramanian Swamy, to Virat Hindustan Sangam viewers and the viewers all over the globe. Thank you very much for joining us. Next Sunday, 8 p.m. Till then, Namaskar, Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.